sun hung low over the rolling plains of Texas, casting a golden glow over the sprawling farmland that had been in Jack Reynolds' family for 3 generations. Jack, a Vietnam veteran with a strong handshake and a heart full of pride, stood on the porch of his farmhouse, staring at the letter in his trembling hands. Final notice of foreclosure. The bold, unforgiving letters stared back at him, sealing his fate. He had fought for his country, survived the horrors of war, and worked tirelessly to keep his land. But none of that mattered to the bank. Decades of hard work, sweat, and sacrifice were about to be taken away because of a few missed mortgage payments. He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, feeling the weight of failure. His wife, Margaret, came to stand beside him, her soft eyes filled with worry. "Jack will find a way," she whispered, but he could hear the doubt in her voice. Jack had tried everything: loans, negotiations, even a GoFundMe page. But nothing had worked. The bank had given him 30 days to vacate the property, and that deadline was now just a week away. "Margie, I ain't letting them take this land," Jack muttered, his voice firm. "If I have to stand out there with my rifle, I will." She squeezed his hand, worry deepening in her eyes. She knew her husband was a fighter, but this wasn't a battle he could win with grit and determination alone. Just then, the rumble of tires on gravel broke the tense silence. Jack turned to see his son, Luke, pulling up in his old pickup truck, dust kicking up behind him. Luke was in his early 30s, a Marine who had served in Iraq, and he had his father's stubborn streak. "Dad," Luke said as he climbed out of the truck, "I might have found someone who can help." Jack frowned. "Unless it's a lawyer who can make this bank change their mind, I don't see how." Luke hesitated, then said, "It's bigger than that. I reached out to someone who might have some pull." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Luke exhaled. "The president." Jack laughed dryly. "You mean Biden?" "Son, we ain't exactly on his radar." Luke shook his head. "No, Dad. Trump." Jack's face went blank. "Donald Trump? The man who's been making headlines every damn day?" Luke nodded. "I know it sounds crazy, but I got in touch with someone on his team. He's been talking a lot about standing up for veterans, about protecting American landowners. And they actually responded." Jack narrowed his eyes. "You're telling me Donald Trump is gonna come down to my farm and help me keep my land?" Luke shrugged. "I don't know, but they said he's interested in hearing your story." Margaret gasped. "Jack, this could be our only shot." Jack shook his head in disbelief. "I'll believe it when I see it." Little did he know, he was about to see it sooner than he ever expected. 3 days later, the Reynolds farm buzzed with an energy it hadn't seen in years. Jack stood on his front porch, watching as black SUVs and a convoy of security vehicles rolled down the dusty road leading to his home. The American flag hanging from the porch flapped in the wind as the cars came to a halt. Jack wiped his hands on his worn jeans, still struggling to believe this was real. Margaret stood beside him, hands clutched together in nervous anticipation. Luke, ever the optimist, had a look of quiet confidence. And then the door to the lead SUV opened. Donald J. Trump stepped out, dressed in a sharp navy suit with his signature red tie. He took in the farm with a businessman's eye before his gaze landed on Jack. The former president walked toward him with a sense of purpose, flanked by a few advisors and a camera crew. Jack didn't move. He was still processing the fact that the most famous man in America was walking up his driveway. "Jack Reynolds," Trump called out, his voice unmistakable. "I've heard a lot about you." Jack swallowed hard before stepping forward, extending his hand. "Mr. President," he said gruffly. Trump grasped Jack's hand firmly. "You're a fighter, I like that. Vietnam vet." "Huh? Yes, sir," Jack replied. Trump nodded. "America needs to do better for our veterans. That's why I'm here." He gestured to the farm. "This land means something to you, doesn't it?" Jack's chest tightened. "It's everything. My granddaddy bought this land. My daddy worked it, and I've spent my whole life keeping it running. I thought I was doing everything right. But the bank doesn't give a damn about hard work anymore." Trump scoffed. That's the problem with this country right now. Good, hardworking Americans like you getting crushed by the system. The banks, the bureaucracy, the whole corrupt establishment. It's a disgrace. Jack studied Trump's face. He had seen him on TV 1,000 times, but standing here in person, there was something undeniable about his presence. Margaret finally found her voice. Mr. President, we've tried everything. They're taking our land in 4 days. Trump turned to one of his aides. We're not gonna let that happen, right? The aide nodded. We've already looked into the situation. There are legal avenues, but it's complicated. Jack sighed. I don't need false hope, sir. If the bank says they're taking it, they'll take it. Trump leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Jack, listen to me. I win battles, and I like winning big. We're gonna fight this. Jack wanted to believe him, but he had been let down too many times before. How? He asked. Trump smirked. Watch and learn. Before Jack could respond, Trump turned toward the cameras that had been recording everything. He squared his shoulders, adjusted his tie, and faced the American people. Folks, what we have here is a perfect example of what's wrong with this country. A great American, a veteran, a patriot, about to lose everything because the system is rigged against him. I'm calling out the banks. I'm calling out the politicians who let this happen. This is a disgrace. Jack could feel the intensity in Trump's voice as he continued. But let me tell you something. This man is not losing his land. Not on my watch. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Trump pointed at the cameras. If you're watching this, if you believe in standing up for our veterans, I want you to know we're gonna fix this. Stay tuned, because this fight isn't over. Jack had no idea what Trump was planning, but something told him his life was about to change forever. The moment Trump's speech aired, everything changed. The video of him standing in front of Jack's farmhouse, calling out the banks and vowing to stop the foreclosure, spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was trending across social media, and by morning, news stations were covering it nationwide. Jack wasn't sure what to think. He had spent his life being a simple farmer, a veteran, and a family man. Now, his name was being mentioned alongside the President of the United States. Jack, you need to see this, Luke said, rushing into the kitchen with his phone in hand. Jack looked up from his coffee. Margaret sat beside him, her hands wrapped around her mug, still in disbelief over yesterday's events. Luke placed his phone on the table, showing a news broadcast. Donald Trump has once again shaken the establishment, this time by stepping into the battle of a struggling veteran on the verge of losing his land. Experts say his involvement could force the bank's hand. Jack sighed and rubbed his temples. I don't know if I should be excited or terrified. Margaret placed a hand on his. Honey, this might be our miracle. Before Jack could respond, the house phone rang. He grabbed it instinctively, his voice gruff. Reynolds. A hesitant voice spoke on the other end. Mr. Reynolds, this is Thomas Harper from Lone Star Bank. I, wanted to talk about your mortgage situation. Jack stiffened. This was the first time anyone from the bank had called him instead of just mailing legal threats. Go on. Given the recent attention and certain pressures, we'd like to discuss an alternative solution. We may be able to adjust the terms of your mortgage. Jack's eyes widened. Are you telling me you want to make a deal? There was a pause. I'm saying we're open to discussions, sir. Jack leaned back in his chair. He didn't need to be a businessman to know what was happening. The bank was afraid. The last thing they wanted was a public war with Trump and his millions of supporters. Tell you what, Jack said, glancing at Margaret, who was holding her breath. I'll think about it. But if you want to talk terms, you can come here and do it in person. The man hesitated. Of course, sir. I'll arrange for a representative to visit you tomorrow. Jack hung up the phone and exhaled deeply. Margie, I think this is actually working. Luke grinned. Told you, Dad. When Trump says something's gonna happen, it happens. But Jack wasn't convinced yet. He knew banks. He knew corporations. They didn't back down easily. And something in his gut told him this fight wasn't over. The next day, just as promised, A shiny black sedan pulled up in front of the Reynolds farmhouse. Jack stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching as a well-dressed man in a navy suit stepped out. The man looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't used to walking on dirt roads. "Mr. Reynolds," the man called, adjusting his tie as he approached. "I'm David Langston, Senior Loan Officer with Lone Star Bank. Thanks for agreeing to meet." Jack gave a curt nod but didn't offer a handshake. "Didn't think you boys had much of a choice." Langston forced a smile. "Well, given the unique circumstances, we wanted to explore options that might work for both parties." Jack leaned against the wooden porch railing. "Funny. A week ago you were just gonna throw me off my land. What changed?" Langston cleared his throat. "Mr. Reynolds, as you know, the bank operates under strict policies. But given the public attention this case has received, we'd like to propose a restructuring of your mortgage. Lower interest rates, extended terms. We want to work with you." Jack studied the man's face. He could smell the fear beneath the corporate professionalism. Before he could respond, a familiar voice rang out from behind him. "Jack, let me handle this." Jack turned to see Donald Trump himself stepping onto the porch, flanked by a few advisors. Langston paled. "Mr. President," he stammered. Trump waved a dismissive hand. "Save it. I know exactly what's happening here. You guys saw the backlash, you saw my people rallying behind Jack, and now you want to make a deal because you're afraid of the fallout." Langston swallowed hard. "Mr. President, we're simply looking for a fair resolution." "Fair?" Trump scoffed. "Fair would have been you helping Jack before I got involved. Instead, you tried to crush him. That's what banks do, right? They step on the little guy and only back down when they get called out." Jack smirked. Damn, it felt good to have someone with power saying what he had been thinking all along. Trump turned to Jack. "Do you trust these guys, Jack?" Jack shook his head. "Not one bit." Trump nodded. "That's what I thought. Here's what we're gonna do. We're not taking their offer." Langston's face twitched. "Sir, with all due respect, if Mr. Reynolds doesn't accept our terms, the foreclosure will still proceed in 2 days." Trump grinned. "That's where you're wrong." Langston blinked. "Excuse me?" Trump turned to one of his advisors. "Tell him." The advisor stepped forward, holding a folder. "We've done some digging. Turns out, Lone Star Bank has received federal funding under veteran support initiatives. Foreclosing on a veteran, especially after this publicity, could be considered a violation of federal regulations. If this goes to court, not only could you lose this case, but your bank could be subject to investigations." Langston's face turned ashen. That's not." Trump cut him off. "It's checkmate. You either wipe Jack's debt clean, or you deal with the biggest legal and PR nightmare of your life." Langston opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was trapped. Jack felt a lump in his throat. He had never seen a man like Trump in action before, and it was a sight to behold. After a long, agonizing pause, Langston sighed. "Fine. The bank will drop the foreclosure and clear the remaining balance. Mr. Reynolds can keep his land." Margaret let out a gasp. Luke punched the air. And Jack? He felt tears prick at his eyes. Trump patted him on the back. "Told you, Jack. I like to win. And I like to win big." Jack shook his head, still stunned. "Mr. President, I don't even know what to say." Trump smirked. "Say, thank you, Mr. President. That usually works." Jack chuckled and gave him a firm handshake. "Thank you, Mr. President." But the biggest shock was still to come. As the dust settled and Langston drove away, Jack stood on his porch, still trying to process what had just happened. A week ago, he had been staring down the end of his family's legacy. Now, thanks to Donald Trump, his land was safe. But Trump wasn't done yet. "Jack," Trump said, adjusting his tie, "I don't just fix problems. I create opportunities." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Trump grinned. "You're a fighter. You didn't just roll over when things got tough. That's the kind of attitude America needs more of. So I've got a proposition for you." Jack glanced at Margaret, who looked just as confused as he felt. "Go on," he said cautiously. Trump gestured toward the farmland. This place has history. It's got roots. And right now, America needs to get back to its roots. I want to turn this farm into a symbol of veteran-owned, American-made agricultural initiative. Something that shows the world that we take care of our own. Jack blinked. Sir, I'm just a farmer. Trump shook his head. No, Jack, you're more than that. You're a story, and people need to hear it. Margaret gasped. Are you saying you want to invest in our farm? Trump smirked. Invest? Jack, I want to make this farm famous. We're going to use this land to produce American-grown products with a special veteran seal. People will love it. They'll support it. We'll create jobs. We'll inspire other veterans to do the same. And most importantly, Trump pointed at Jack. You'll never have to worry about losing this land again. Jack felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. Mr. President, I don't know what to say. Trump patted him on the shoulder. Say yes, because this is going to be huge. Luke, who had been standing off to the side, suddenly stepped forward. Dad, this is incredible. This could change everything. Margaret wiped away a tear. Jack, I think this is what we've been praying for. Jack swallowed hard. He had spent his life fighting for this land, for his family, for his country. And now, he was being given a chance to do something bigger than he had ever imagined. He took a deep breath, looked Donald Trump in the eye, and nodded. I'm in. Trump grinned. That's what I like to hear. News cameras panned over the rolling fields of the newly rebranded Reynolds Veteran Farm. The once struggling land was now thriving, with workers, many of them veterans, tending to crops, packaging goods, and proudly wearing Made in America badges on their uniforms. At the grand opening, Trump stood at a podium in front of a massive American flag. Jack stood beside him, wearing a clean button-up shirt with the veteran seal embroidered on the chest. Trump spoke to the roaring crowd. This is what America is all about. Hard work, loyalty, and taking care of our heroes. We didn't just save this farm. We created an opportunity for thousands of veterans across the country. The crowd cheered. Jack felt a lump in his throat. 6 months ago, he had been preparing to lose everything. Now, he was standing next to the President of the United States, running a farm that would make a real difference. When Trump turned to him, the former president smirked. Jack, you were ready to go down swinging. But guess what? We won. Jack chuckled, gripping Trump's hand in a firm shake. Damn right we did. The crowd erupted. The cameras flashed. And Jack knew his life would never be the same again. Professor Richard Grayson was no ordinary lecturer at the prestigious Columbia University. A celebrated scholar of philosophy and a staunch atheist, he had built his reputation on challenging religious beliefs, especially Christianity. Every semester, he took it upon himself to educate his students on what he called the myth of Jesus. His opening lecture was always the same. Standing at the front of the large auditorium, he would smirk and scan the fresh batch of students before making his bold statement. Jesus Christ never existed. Religion is a crutch for the weak-minded. And if anyone in this class dares to challenge me, be prepared to back it up with cold, hard facts. A hush fell over the classroom. Most students, intimidated by his confidence, avoided eye contact. They knew his reputation. Grayson could dismantle any religious argument with his sharp wit and knowledge of history. No one wanted to be the target of his mockery. But this semester, something was different. Sitting in the middle row, a young man watched the professor intently. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with an air of quiet confidence. His name? Barron Trump. Despite being the son of President Donald Trump, Barron had chosen to attend Columbia without special treatment. He wanted to be judged on his own merits. He wasn't one to seek attention, but today he knew he couldn't stay silent. As Professor Grayson continued his rant about how Jesus was a fabrication of history, Barron calmly raised his hand. Sir, with all due respect, I disagree. The room turned silent. All eyes darted toward him. No one had ever dared to contradict Professor Grayson on the first day of class. The professor's smirk widened, his eyes gleaming with amusement. Oh, And who might you be? Baron. Baron Trump. A murmur spread through the classroom. Some students whispered in surprise. Others waited eagerly to see what would unfold. Grayson chuckled. Ah, a Trump. This should be interesting. All right, Baron. Tell me, what proof do you have that Jesus Christ existed? Better yet, prove to me that he was anything more than just another historical figure. Baron took a deep breath. He knew he wasn't just defending his faith, he was defending the truth. First, let's establish something. Are you saying that Jesus never existed? Or just that he wasn't divine? Grayson folded his arms. I'm saying he never existed in any meaningful way. The Jesus story was cobbled together from various myths. Christianity is nothing more than borrowed legends. Baron nodded. Interesting. So, you're ignoring the overwhelming historical evidence from non-Christian sources like Tacitus, Josephus, and Pliny the Younger, men who documented Jesus' existence without any religious bias. Grayson's smirk faltered for a brief second.